Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. I want to start out the podcast by talking about the school shooting that occurred in Highlands Ranch, Colorado on Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home studio in my home office doing work as usual when I noticed on my Twitter feed that there were tweets from local news agencies about the school shooting. So I turned on the television just to see what the local newscasters were, the local broadcast stations, were saying about the school shooting. And I did so, I think I'm always curious when there's breaking news like this, anything that the networks or local television considers breaking news. I like to tune in because I'm curious, just like anybody else. What is the breaking news? What are the facts about what has happened? But I'm also curious to find out, once I kind of know generally what the story is, how do the local broadcasters, or how do the networks, in this case I first turned to Fox News to see whether or not Fox News had gone to wall-to-wall coverage on the school shooting. And in the first hour or so, they had not done so. And in fact, I think Neil Cavuto's show was on. So they were going back to Shepard Smith, who was giving updates as he was able to get updates from the local Fox affiliate and I think from the local ABC affiliate about what had occurred at the STEM high school or the STEM school in Highlands Ranch. And once I kind of got a feel for what the networks, or at least the cable channels, were doing, I then turned to the local channels to see how they were covering the news. Now, I don't want anyone to think that I'm somehow unsympathetic to the absolute fear that a school shooting creates in the minds of parents. I've got grandkids that are in schools, and I can imagine the fear that goes through a parent, through a grandparent, or anyone else who has a child in a school, particularly a school where the shooting takes place. The fear of the unknown, the fear of, was my child hurt? Was my child killed? Was my child somehow involved? I mean, all of the things that run through your mind anytime that one of these incidents occurs. I'm sympathetic to those who are fearful, those who are afraid, those who are scared. I get that. I fully get that. But I want to set that aside for a moment. And I want to talk a little bit about what I've talked about in the past, those of you who've listened to me on the radio, about a graph. Imagine the picture of a graph in your mind of risk versus consequences. And I've also often said that the risk of something happening may be minuscule. In this case, the school shooting. The risk of any one individual or group of individuals, or the risk of any one school being involved in a school shooting is minuscule. Now, if you listen to the news, that's not the case. I heard many local, many national people, in fact, you'll hear from CNN in a moment, talk about this rash of school shootings. So you would think that the risk of a school shooting is off the charts. But if you actually look at the number of school shootings, you'll see that the risk of a school shooting occurring at any one particular school, or the risk of any one particular school student being injured, shot, killed in a school shooting, is minuscule. When you think of the millions of students that are in the thousands of schools across the United States, the risk of any one individual being injured or killed in a school shooting is minuscule. But the consequences, remember, we're talking about risk versus consequences. The consequences of a school shooting, in this case, Highlands Ranch, Colorado, the consequences are staggering. Because when you look at the consequences of those 8 students who were injured and the one who was killed, the consequences for those families is off the charts. It's like, you know, I still read Calvin and Hobbes, the cartoon. They rerun those cartoons, and the home that Calvin and Hobbes live in, they were at a wedding over the weekend, and they came home, and they discovered that their home had been burglarized, and now the cartoon is talking about or showing the parents not quite grasping how to deal with the invasion that they feel because their home has been burglarized. And Calvin's dad can't sleep because he's talking about how difficult it is to be an adult and to have to deal with those kinds of circumstances, the home being burglarized, and the kind of invasion and the kind of vulnerability that makes one feel. Well, I can't even imagine what it must feel like to be the parents of one of these children that was injured, and I certainly cannot comprehend what it's like to be the parents of a child who was killed. But what I do comprehend is that we now live in a society where these events, no matter how rare they are exploited because the news stations know, whether it's the local stations or whether it's the national networks or it's the cable networks, they know that they can drive eyeballs and ears to that story, and they can get incredible ratings. And so they just blithely, and I think without thinking, make statements that are just inherently false, that are just inherently untrue. Statements like, well, here we go again. Statements like, we can't believe this continues to happen. Statements like, why does this continue to happen all of the time in this country? And how is it that we've gotten to the point that there are so many school shootings in the United States? Let's hear, for example, this is CNN's Camerota discussing the Highlands Ranch shooting. And they have Joe, I can't remember Joe's last name, you'll hear it in the soundbite, Deputy Chief of Staff, political advisor to Bill Clinton, when the Columbine shooting occurred almost 20 years ago.
Everybody wants to know what would drive kids to show up at their school with guns. This is madness. It's madness. And
it is madness, but it's madness that is not as widespread as we think that it is. So yes, this one particular case is madness. Every case is madness. But the madness is not widespread.
we don't have to live this way. You know, I remember, let's bring in Joe Lockhart, because obviously, Joe, you were in the White House during Columbine in this basically same area. You know, I remember before that, 20 years ago, I was traveling in South Korea, of all places. And the question that the kids there all had for me was, why do the kids in your country shoot each other at schools? That was 20 years ago. We are better than this. We don't have to live this way.
We're better than this, and we don't have to live this way. What's the implication of that statement? That statement is, the implication of that statement is, these things occur all the time. That it's just dangerous to put your kids in school because they just run this incredible risk of being shot or injured by a shooter in a school. That's the implication. Why would she say that as I travel around the world, that people come up to me all the time and ask, why do you keep shooting each other in schools? Well, I would suggest that the people who ask that question don't really understand how often or how not often these shootings occur. But let's listen to Joe Lockhart.
And you were the one who walked in and told Bill Clinton about the Columbine.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget the day. And again, before Columbine, these things were seen as aberrations. They've now become something that, are the norm.
What? That school shootings have become the norm? Seriously? If we are to believe that this has become the norm and that school shootings are a growing epidemic in America, the truth of the matter is that they are not. James Allen Fox, a professor of criminology at Northeastern University, who has studied the phenomenon of mass murder since the 1980s, says that schools are safer today than they've ever been in previous decades. So this professor at Northeastern University and a doctoral student by the name of Emma Friedel have crunched the numbers, and the results should actually come to a relief as parents. But the numbers should also be some sort of teaching lesson for those in the news media to quit describing this as some sort of epidemic and that it has become the norm. Now, first, while multiple victim shootings in general are kind of on the rise, that's simply not the case in schools. There are, on average, about one a year in a country of more than 100,000 schools. 100,000 schools. And on average, about one per year. There were more back in the 1990s than in recent years, says the professor. For example, in one school year, 1997 to 1998, there were 4 multiple victim shootings in schools. But he points out that the overall number of gunshot victims at schools is also down. According to his own numbers and his own studies, back in the 1992-1993 school year, about 0.55 students per 1 million were shot and killed. 0.55. In 2014 to 2015, that rate was closer to 0.15 million. Fox says that the difference is the impression. The difference is the impression, he says, the perception that people have. And he traces that directly to cable news and social media. Listen to what the professor says. Quote, "Today, we have cell phone recordings of gunfire that play over and over and over again. So it's the impression that is very different." And that's why, he says, people think things are a lot worse now. But statistically, the stats say otherwise. He's not the only one. Other experts agree. Garen Wintemute is an emergency room physician who leads a prominent gun violence research program at the University of California, Davis. He says that school shootings specifically are not epidemic. He says, quote, "Schools are just about the safest place in the world for kids to be. Although each one of them is horrific." That's my point. Every single one of these that occurs, any one of these, if there's just one every 5 years, every single one is horrific. Back to what he says. Although each one of them is horrific, and they rivet the entire nation for a period of time, mass shootings at schools are really very uncommon, and they are not increasing in frequency. What has changed is how we are aware of them. The doctor says that he believes that mass shootings, whether in schools or elsewhere, are increasing social pressure to address the far more common threat of small-scale shootings, which mostly happen in private. not at schools, not where they catch the attention of the media, but where they are a blip in the news. A student kills another student somewhere else, at a party, at a home, at a gathering. So that's just a shooting. And there is not the wall-to-wall coverage. There is not the sense of panic. And there certainly is not the coverage because it's a shooting outside of a school. Now, just to be fair, I want to point out that this doctor endorses gun safety measures like the red flag laws. But both the doctor and the professor say that by focusing so narrowly on school shootings, we run the risk of turning schools into fortresses. The professor says, given the statistics, it is misguided to put kids through metal detectors and active shooter drills, and he does not like the new calls for arming teachers. Now, he and I disagree about that because I think whether it's a school, whether it's a movie theater, whether it's a mall, you think of all the places that you go where armed security is either visibly present or if you're paying attention, you will see that there is armed security, but they blend in with the crowd. Or if you're a concealed carry permit holder, you know that you are part of the security. If, like me, you're a concealed carry permit holder, you know that regardless of whether you're in a school, I know there's gun-free zones, or a movie theater, and I know those are gun-free zones, but I don't care because I'm going to do what I need to do to protect myself. But this perception, both the doctor and the professor say, the perception of this being some sort of epidemic is putting school administrators in a difficult position. Marysville Pilchuck High School, about an hour north of Seattle, has experienced the tragedy of a school shooting, and the statistical rarity is no comfort. Back in October of 2014, a freshman shot 5 other students in the cafeteria, killed 4 of those students before he killed himself. And ever since, the administrators at that school have struggled to restore the students' sense of safety. Jason Thompson, the acting district superintendent at the time, said, probably every day it pops into your head at one time or another. You think, okay, we've had our shooting, right? But it's human to think that way. But I think a lot of times for me, it's like, this could happen again. Now let's think about that. It could happen again. Because as I said earlier, risk versus consequence. The risk is that it can happen anywhere at any time. But the likelihood of that happening anytime at anywhere is minuscule. But I know the consequences of it happening. If and when it did happen in that rare time, the consequences are overwhelming. So for the past 5 years, the district has been wrestling with how to make their schools safe without going overboard. From a parent's perspective, they say, holy cow, why aren't we doing this or why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we building prisons? Why aren't we building moats? Why aren't we doing everything we can to turn this school into a fortress? Well, there's really no need. And to put it as bluntly as I can, and still trying to remain sensitive to the rawness of the emotions of people that might be listening to the podcast. You turn your schools into a fortress. You turn everything into a fortress in this country. Those are the kinds of steps that you take in a police state. Those are the kinds of steps, the kinds of irrational steps that you take when you don't understand the statistics, when you don't understand the risk versus the consequences. The whole idea there is this epidemic of school shootings is just factually untrue. You can blame the media, you can blame social media, and you can actually blame the people who consume all of that and who allow themselves, based on pure emotion, to believe that there is this rash and this epidemic of school shootings. And it's simply not true. I can't imagine what it's like to have a student go to school and to never come back, or to find that student in a hospital with injuries. Simply can't imagine it. But what I do know is that those students are more likely to be hurt in an automobile accident, in a drowning accident, in some sort of injury or death anywhere but the school. But because we have a media and we now have a social media lifestyle that allows us to just think otherwise, how much more incumbent is it on us to understand the facts and to not let what comes bleeding out of a television, bleeding out of a radio, bleeding out of a podcast, bleeding out of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you're consuming your news, to distort the reality. And the reality is the risk is minuscule. Yes, the consequences are high. The consequences are fearful. And I totally understand that. But I also understand that if we make public policy, whether it be at a school district level or it be at the United States Congress level, if we make public policy based on falsehoods, irrational fear, on perception versus reality, we'll have public policies that are awful, ineffective, and quite frankly, dangerous, and dangerous to the survival of a free republic. So we can grieve for those students and we can grieve for those families, but I'm just begging you to understand the reality versus the perception that the media and others would have you believe. There is not a rash or an epidemic of school shootings, and in fact, they have declined over the past 2 decades. That's the reality. On a lighter note, but a note that nonetheless can be almost as depressing if you care about public policy, is this renewal of the idea of a universal basic income. If you're not familiar with UBI, Universal Basic Income, it is that the federal government will somehow take money. Now remember, the federal government doesn't have money on its own. The federal government only gets money by extracting taxes from you and me. Or the misperception, they extract taxes from corporations. Corporations do not pay taxes. The taxes that corporations actually pay on their tax return is money that they have collected in the cost of doing business. So if a corporation sells a service or a corporation sells a product, the cost of that service or product takes into account not only the overhead that it takes to produce that cost, that product or service, not only does it take into account all of the costs of producing that service or that product, but the price also takes into account the taxes that the corporation's going to have to pay. So that when you and I purchase that service or that product, we're paying the taxes, not the corporation. For example, let's just put it very simply. When you go into a grocery store and you buy a product, cottage cheese, I don't even eat cottage cheese, so I don't even know why that came into my head. But you pick up a tub of cottage cheese. The cost of producing that cottage cheese by the cottage cheese manufacturer includes the taxes that that corporation will have to pay at the end of the year on its profits. So they have built into the price of that cottage cheese that you buy the taxes they're going to have to pay. So when you pick up that tub of cottage cheese and you put it in your grocery cart, you take it to the checkout, you pay the $1.50 or the $2.50 or whatever cottage cheese costs. Part of the cost of that price includes the taxes that the company that made the cottage cheese is going to have to pay at the end of the year. So you pay the taxes, not the corporation. So the idea of a universal basic income is that the government is somehow going to take money and then they're going to give that money back to individuals, back to every citizen. Andrew Yang wants to give $1,000 to every citizen in the United States. Now, I don't know whether that means minors or not, but if it includes those who have reached the age of majority, $1,000 to every individual. Listen to what he says about what the effects will be of taking money from you, money from me, because that is where the government gets its money. That and borrowing. So they borrow against future tax dollars, future tax revenue. So they take from you and me every fiscal year when we pay our taxes, and then they borrow. What does Andrew Yang want to do?
Is how he, on the campaign trail, talks about jobs.
That'll be my measure of economic success, and it's restoring the dignity of work. My dad would define a job, and he'd say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community.
So how do you answer that if you're giving universal basic income, you're taking away that dignity, that respect of having a job?
Well, the freedom dividend is actually very pro-work, because putting this money into Americans' hands, that money would circulate over and over through their neighborhoods and communities. It would create more than 2 million jobs around the country.
Pause. Taking this money and putting it in the hands of individuals and letting that money circulate through the economy will grow the economy and will actually allow the creation of more jobs. I want to scream. I want to pull my hair out. Because think about this. What they're proposing when you do a universal basic income is taking from working people that pay taxes every year. So look at whatever you paid in income taxes. Look at whatever you paid in FICA taxes and Medicare taxes, and look at all the taxes that you pay. They want to take those taxes, process that through the federal bureaucracy, and then send you a check every year for $1,000. Now, part of that $1,000, part of that money that gets collected for universal basic income, gets eaten up by the process of the bureaucracy handling and processing that money. They have to collect it, the IRS, so you have to pay the cost of the IRS to collect it. Then you have to transfer the money. Congress has to appropriate it. Gets appropriated to, I don't know, the Department of Treasury, I suppose. And then the Department of Treasury has to then process and send out checks to everybody over the age of 18, and you get your $1,000. How about this? Why don't you just reduce my taxes by $1,000? Then I will decide how to spend that, because I will do the same thing with my own money. I'll spend it or invest it, and that will churn through the economy and make more money. But think about the consequences, the unintended consequences of universal basic income. If I know that my taxes aren't going to be reduced, and that I'm going to get $1,000 of that back anyway, what incentive do I have to try to earn an extra $1,000 every year? I have none. that incentive is taken away. And the belief that somehow the government knows better how to spend our money than we do is insane. And the idea that the government giving us our own money back is going to churn through the economy and grow the economy, we already have proof that by giving us more of our own money back, that increases the economy, that grows the economy, and that grows jobs. How do I know that? Look at the Trump tax cuts and look at what the economy's doing. Look at the numbers of jobs created. Look at how wages are increasing. When you give people more of their own money back, that churns more efficiently and effective through the economy than the government could ever do.
And would also recognize a lot of the work that's being done in our families and communities that is not being recognized by the market, which includes people like my wife, who's at home with our two children, one of whom is autistic, and right now the market values her work at zero. So the freedom dividend is actually very pro-work. It would create jobs and would create opportunities for many more Americans to be able to do the kind of work that they want to do in their communities every day.
Talk about a disconnect in logic. So he talks about the what was it called, the freedom dividend or something. And he says the marketplace currently does not put a dollar value on his wife, who is a stay-at-home mom taking care of an autistic child. Well, why would? Now, if you want to make that academic exercise and you want to value what a housewife or a homemaker or a stay-at-home mom, or for that matter, a stay-at-home dad, what the value of that work is, I'm sure we can find studies that can quantify the dollar value of that work. But more importantly, he tries to make the point that
children, one of whom is autistic, and right now the market values her work at zero. So the freedom dividend is actually very pro-work. It would create jobs and would create opportunities.
Wait a minute. Is his wife, because they now get $1,000, is because his wife gets $1,000, is that going to somehow cause her to no longer be a stay-at-home mom? $1,000, less than $100 a month. You think that's going to cause her to say, hey, you know what, sweetheart, I'm not going to stay at home with our autistic child anymore. I'm getting $90 a month, so I'm going to go to work. That $90 a month wouldn't even cover the cost of child care. So they conflate the argument, and they try to somehow, which is the kind of the whipsaw logic that they use, oh, there's no value put on my wife staying at home with her autistic child, so if we give $1,000 a month, somehow that's going to grow jobs, but he never tells us how that's going to help his wife. And you know why? Because it's not. It's only taking $1,000 that he's paid in income taxes and given some of that $1,000 back to her. Why not just give them their own $1,000? Why not just reduce their taxes? Why not just give them more of their own money to spend to let them decide how to spend it? Universal basic income. You know what that's really about? Creating more government dependency. That's the bottom line. End of story. You know, over the years, 13 years on radio and now doing the podcast and hopefully maybe being back on radio soon, I've coined the phrase dumbassery. Dumbassery is just really that kind of idiocy that politicians or just individuals do every single day. Well, I have to say that George Clooney has decided that he's going to do his own version of dumbassery, only his is called dumb effery. Insert the F word. Dumb effery. He describes to us what dumb effery is.
Hi, I'm actor, director, and two-time sexiest man alive, George Clooney. Science has given us unprecedented knowledge of the natural world, from subatomic particles to the majesty of space. Science enables us to cure diseases, to communicate across great distances, even to fly. Tragically, though, The volumes of invaluable knowledge gathered over centuries are now threatened by an epidemic of dumb idiots saying dumb.
You know what this is? It's a snowball. So it's very, very cold out.
Dumb is highly contagious, infecting the minds of even the most stable geniuses.
If you have a windmill anywhere near your house, they say the noise causes cancer. You tell me that one, okay?
Wow. As a result, rampant dumb now threatens our health, our security, and our planet. Fortunately, there is hope. At United to Defeat Untruthful Misinformation and Support Science. You dumbass. Your generous contribution to You Dumbass will provide desperately needed knowledge to dumb idiots on Facebook and Twitter all around the world. Just $20 will convince one idiot that climate change is real. $50 will teach 5 brainless dumb to vaccinate their kids. And $200 will teach 10 knuckle draggers that dinosaurs existed, but not at the same time as people. Together, we can win the fight against dumb-ness, but we can't do it alone. Call this number today. Operators are standing by. Don't be an idiot. The world needs your support. You dumbass.
Okay, mildly funny, but certainly not laugh out loud funny. What I find interesting, though, is at the very beginning when he talks about scientific advances have given us all these different things. Why do we not believe that scientific advances are going to cause or are going to cure many of the ills that those on the left tell us that if we don't change our ways today, that if we don't give up our cars, our air conditioning, our heating, if we don't give up food, meat, whatever, if we don't just strip ourselves of all of our clothes, burn down our homes, move to the countryside, and try to live off the land, that somehow the planet's doomed. You know, as I said yesterday, we continue to make these incredible scientific advances. And I think that a lot of the problems that we face today, science, over time, is going to solve those problems. If you go back through the annals of history, I don't think there's a time in human history when people didn't believe that this was the end of society, this was the end of civilization as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. Even though I tend sometimes to think that this republic is on the decline, and even though I look at some problems, medical issues, cancer, for example, HIV/AIDS, pick any medical malady that we're concerned about. How do we not know that we're going to develop some sort of cure or treatment because scientists and doctors and laboratories all over the world are studying these things and working on these things, and boom, one day we're going to pop up and there's going to be a scientific answer, there's going to be some sort of solution, some sort of remedy, and then we'll all go, oh, isn't that great? And then we'll move on to the next thing. We just tend to have this pessimistic view of the world that we're always near the end of society, and if we don't change our ways today, that's going to be the end of everything. That drives me nuts. An example? New York State. New York State is actually descending into eco-tyranny. I don't think there's a better word for it than eco-tyranny. You know, there's no guarantee that the United States will always be a first world country with a modern standard of living. Imagine if the people that are running New York control the entire country. I think that in less than a generation, we would be right where they want us, shivering in the dark. As I said about the Clooney thing, I think sometimes they just want us to burn our clothes, put on a loincloth, destroy our homes, destroy our businesses, destroy our cars, no air conditioning, no heating, and just go live out in the wild. That's what they really want us to do. And I think that's what they want us to do in New York. They actually want people shivering in the dark. An environmental bill unveiled this week could block construction on a pipeline that would bring natural gas to New York City. Now, natural gas, you and I know, is clean, it's affordable. But all of those nut jobs, all of those dumbasses, the dumb effers, as George Clooney would say, they oppose natural gas on some sort of incomprehensible ideological ground. That incomprehensible ideological basis is you have to oppose natural gas because it is a fossil fuel, an FF. If you're a fossil fuel, you are inherently horrible for the world. The legislation sponsored by Senator Jen Metzger, a Democrat in Ulster County, New York, and Assemblywoman Nilly Rosie, a Democrat from Queens, would ban the development of new plants or pipelines and also direct state energy officials to create a plan for moving the electrical grid entirely off fossil fuels by no later than 2040, in 20 years. I love how everybody seems to think that government can drive innovation, that government can say, we have to have an innovative solution to X, whatever X problem it is, and we want you to do that in the next 10 years. As if scientists work on a timeline. Scientists go to work every day not knowing whether that's the day they find a new discovery, a new cure, a new remedy, a new process, a new source of energy, or whether it's 6 months or 6 years down the road. But somehow these nut jobs seem to think that they can put down a timeline and, the scientists go to work and say, well, we've only got 10 years, so we've got to put our research on a timeline so that we have the solution in X number of years. Talk about not understanding how scientists work. New York State Assembly is a grand example of that. Now, it is actually said by some people about this bill that it would improve the weather in New York. If passed, the measure could put a stop to any project that has yet to be permitted, including the 23-mile-long Williams Pipeline, set to carry fracked natural gas from shale fields in Pennsylvania through New Jersey into the 5 boroughs. Nuclear power might make up the difference without the emitting harmless carbon that we are told to regard with superstitious dread. But they won't allow nukes either. I mean, I guess all that's fine. Why does New York City need energy? Blackouts help members of the community get to know each other. People you never know your neighbors might come through your door, with an axe, with an axe to find out, do you have any food to eat? The utter chaos that might ensue. This new bill is only part of the entire lunatic campaign to abolish the reliable energy required to sustain New York. Lawmakers, according to the story, are also weighing a vote on the Climate and Community Protection Act, which calls for a 100% reduction of all emissions by 2050, attaches fair labor standards to green projects, and includes equity provisions that require 40% of state funds used for the transition away from fossil fuels to be invested in low-income communities and communities of color. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, you take $1 million, and $1 million is supposed to help New York get to be emission-free by 2050. Isn't it fascinating that the lawmakers that have introduced this bill want to take 40%? Now, I just picked the $1 million out of my butt because $1 million helps me quickly calculate 40%. Okay? 40%. So they want to take $400,000 of the $1 million and put that into low-income communities or communities of color. Can somebody explain to me what putting $400,000 of the $1 million that's supposed to get you off fossil fuels, putting that into low-income communities or communities of color? And by the way, communities of color? I thought we were a desegregated society. How do you determine a community of color? And for the love of Pete, tell me what the $400,000 is going to do to reduce emissions by 100%. Imagine if AOC, using the powers of a dictator to inflict her demented Green New Deal, what she could do. How long do you think the lights would stay on? Not only in New York City, but the entire state is ruled by people just like her. Well, I think Colorado is too. We just haven't seen the entire effects of it yet. Wanting to get rid of emissions in New York City and cutting off natural gas supplies. Remind me sometime to tell you the story about how Hillary Clinton and Chuck Schumer and the entire New York delegation, after 9/11, wanted to shut down the Indian Point power plant in Westchester County, just north of Manhattan. So we did a study, and we came back, and we told Senator Clinton, Senator Schumer at the time, I personally did, that the power plant was safe, that terrorists could not really cause a meltdown, and even if by some imaginary accident there was a meltdown of the core of this power plant north of New York City by only a few miles, that it would be contained. And it would be contained. Hillary Clinton told me that she still opposed the power plant, told me in a private meeting. She told me that she opposes the power plant, but she's still going to go out. She's going to go out and say she still opposes the power plant, but she understands that we shouldn't shut it down because that would cause, and to paraphrase what she said to me in her office, yeah, I don't want to shut that plant down because that would necessarily cause electrical rates to skyrocket in New York, and I certainly don't want that to happen. You see, even liberals like Hillary Clinton understand basic economics. Most of what they do is just for public consumption. I say, give New York what it deserves. So while we're on the topic of dumbassery, let's get a couple of taxpayer relief shots in. The first one comes to us from Upper Darby, and it's a pretty darn good one. It goes like this.
The victim of an attempted robbery opens fire in Upper Darby, shooting a suspect dead. Another suspect got away. Police say the suspects had a stick and a toy gun. The victim had a real gun. Good evening. I'm Diana Rocco in for Jessica Dean.
And I'm Chris May. Eyewitness News reporter David Spunt joins us live from Upper Darby, where this all happened. David, you were first on the scene there. What's the latest?
Chris, it's still a developing scene. A lot of police presence out here right now. We are told that the medical examiner van left with the suspect just a few minutes ago. Police are still looking for that other suspect. Chris, it all happened about 50 yards behind me. Police say it happened quickly. A 68-year-old man was walking through the woods near Cobbs Creek when two men tried to rob him.
One has a stick and a mask. The other has a gun.
Upper Darby Police Superintendent Michael Chitwood says the victim, who had a permit to carry a gun, pulled it out and killed one of the attempted robbers on the scene. Neighbors watched from across the street. Michael Hepperly has spent his entire life across from the park and says it's dangerous.
It's not really a good place to go through anytime.
And he says he knows from experience.
I was just walking home at night and they came up behind me and struck me.
Hepperly says he's afraid to walk through the park.
Took my wallet and stuff. Yeah, beat me up a little bit.
Superintendent Chitwood says the second suspect took off and his focus is finding him. All right, the woods you're looking at right now, this is where it happened. Again, it's hard to see because it kind of dips down into a little bit of a ravine right there. Police are not saying the suspects or the victim's name. We know, again, the victim, 68 years old. We're told he's from Philadelphia. He was taken to the hospital with some chest pains. We're told he's going to be okay. We are live in Upper Darby right now, continuing to follow the story. David Spunt.
It's a dangerous park. He's carrying a gun. The law of self-defense. The natural God-given right of self-defense. The next one comes to us from DeSoto. No, I'm sorry. This one is, that was DeSoto. This one comes to us from San Jose. The San Jose taxpayer relief shot.
Following a police shooting in San Jose, officers shot and killed a suspect after police say he hit an officer with his car and dragged him. NBC Bay Area's Marianne Favreau is at SJPD with the latest. Marianne.
Anusha, that sergeant who was dragged and pinned is now hospitalized tonight with serious injuries. And sources tell us the man who was shot and killed is a suspected gang member.
Shots fired, shots fired.
This is sound of police radios. Officers announcing shots fired near Story Road and Colmar Drive in San Jose just before 1 today. San Jose police say while investigating a stolen car, they spotted a suspect and ordered him to get out of a car. Instead, police say the man drove off, hitting an officer, dragging him 10 feet, and then pinning him against a parked car.
Wait a minute. Just because you hit a cop with your car, you drag him 10 feet or more, and then you get him pinned in somewhere, and so the shots are fired? I don't even want to go through the rest of the story. That right there, justified homicide, a justified shooting. Now, of course, the officers will be put on administrative paid leave, which they should be, while the investigation is conducted, because that's what we do as in a civilized society. But I just got to say, if you're a thug and you decide to hit a cop with a car and then pin that cop where he can't get away, yeah, you're likely to end up DRT. Dead right there. And you know what? I'm sorry, but it might be that you actually deserved it. Sometimes taxpayer relief shots are just too good to pass up. So liberal tolerance, actually liberal intolerance, but I like to call it liberal tolerance, is reaching everywhere, even onto the golf course. Now, this story just bumfuzzles me. Ladies Professional Golf Association pro Lexi Thompson announced recently that she is getting off social media. Now, there are a lot of reasons to get off social media. You want to preserve your insanity. You don't want to deal with the dumbassery. You just get tired of it. It's just you reach that saturation point where you just can't take it anymore. Oh, I get that. There's some guy named Charles Buchanan that is I don't even know who this guy is. I wouldn't know him if he was standing right next to me and I would have no idea who Charles Buchanan is. But he just, for whatever reason, a couple of friends of mine retweeted the podcast yesterday, and he came back and just said something really snarky and nasty about me. And it just pissed me off. So normally what I do is I know better. I normally just mute them, which I did mute him later, and I just ignore it. But this guy, for whatever reason, just occasionally swerves into my timeline, says something really bad or snarky about me, and yesterday I just had it. And I pointed out that he's something about only mediocre people think that I am smart. And I pointed out, just trying to be using his own words against him, said something to the effect that, yeah, and only lefty dumbasses think that you're smart. And then he came back and said something about there's a lot to criticize about me, and I retorted that I just find it fascinating that a guy that in his profile says that he likes to have rational discussions makes himself feel good by attacking me, always attacking me. And he always uses the hashtag COPolitics so that anybody that's involved in Colorado politics sees it. So I just fought back and just called him a dumbass and just said, you're muted. And I just find it pathetic that you have to feel superior by attacking me, an individual that you've never met, that you don't know, that I wouldn't know, that if you and I were in the same room, I would have no clue who you are. And frankly, I don't care. It's days like that that make me just want to leave Twitter and Facebook and everything else. And I would, except that I like interacting with all of you. But back to the story of Lexi Thompson, an LPGA Pro tour golfer. She's decided to go dark on social media because she has faced a backlash for having committed a mortal sin. You know what that mortal sin was? She went on a golf outing with President Trump. Quote, she says on Instagram, quote, "Hey everybody, just want to say I will be taking a break from social media. If I post, it will be from my management team on my behalf. I'm too involved with it, and to read some of the hurtful things being said to me lately isn't fair, and I'm not dealing with it." Well, good for her. But stop and think for a moment. Have we really reached the stage in society where having your picture taken with the President of the United States of America causes people that probably just a bunch of numbnuts sitting in their parents' basement or sitting in the Starbucks sipping their latte, overpriced latte, feel that somehow it makes them superior by attacking a pro golfer for the mortal sin of having golfed with the President of the United States. On the other hand, ethnically correct comeback golfer Tiger Woods, tongue-in-cheek, has been taking heat for accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from the President. Rick Riley, the author of Commander-in-Cheat, How Golf Explains Trump, told the New York Times that Woods accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom puts a big stain on the golfer. I don't want to rehash or relitigate Tiger Woods' previous problems, but can you imagine having gone through some of the problems that he's gone through, dealing with the pain medication, dealing with the divorce, dealing with the infidelity, dealing with all of those things, that now getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from the President of the United States puts a stain on the golfer? We're nuts. We're absolutely nuts. Everyone must be a disrespectful leftist or be regarded as stained. That's the world we've gotten to. Meanwhile, these dumbasses preen over how tolerant they are and denounce their opposition as bullies. Really? I just have to laugh. It's pathetic too. It is pathetic that we've reached the stage where social media has become a cesspool. It's truly a cesspool. And I think what it is, it's the anonymity. It is the ability, like this guy Charles Buchanan, that comes after me every once in a while. I, honest to God, have no clue who this guy is. He could be my next door neighbor. I don't know. Well, not my next door neighbor because I know who all of them are, but he could live in my neighborhood. He could be a stalker. He could follow me everywhere I go. I have no clue who this guy is. And you know what else? I don't care. I don't care who the guy is. But what I find utterly fascinating from a psychological, a sociological point of view is that this guy, just like the person that goes after what was her name? Lexi Thompson, the LGPA pro, or that goes after Tiger Woods. I can only imagine that what they're doing is they're sitting literally in the Starbucks, sitting in their living room in their pajamas. They're like pajama boy. And they get some feeling of self-worth. They get some feeling of superiority by attacking other people. I have no problem if people want to attack me on what they believe are the merits. If you want to come after me about something that I did or did not do, and you want to make an argument that makes me, stupid or ignorant or whatever, then let's get it on. But if you just want to attack me ad hominem, hey, we just think you're a dirtbag, I don't deal with that very well. Give me a reason. Give me a reason to fight back. I think that's why they make it all personal, because they know that most people won't fight back. Animal rights. Animal rights militant attacks a butcher. You can't be a butcher anymore either. That's a politically incorrect profession to be in. 2 people are facing fault charges assault charges after dousing a butcher in his stand with red liquid at a market in Paris over the weekend. Now, the fortunately non-violent attack came from a mob of about 15 to 20 maniacs brandishing animal rights slogans. According to the story, a series of French butcher shops have been vandalized in recent months by anti-speciesism activists. Anti-speciesism. Wow. How do you describe yourself? No, I'm not an anti-Semite. No, I'm not a bigot. I'm an anti-speciesism. These activists say that eating meat is an immoral violation of the rights of other species. When we start giving rights to animals, we're in deep doo-doo. Actually, species other than humans have no rights because the concept of non-human rights is absurd. Rights entail responsibilities, and animals cannot comprehend responsibilities. That's why if you have a herd of cattle, you put a fence up. They don't understand that they have a responsibility to stay on those 5 acres or 20 acres or whatever else, wherever you keep your cattle. So you have to fence them in. In contrast, people have a right to be secure in their persons and property. We have a right to be safe from sociopaths, including those who justify their malice with some sort of sanctimonious dumbassery. Attacking a butcher for being a butcher. Unadulterated dumbassery is what that is. Kansas cops are asking people not to shoot their guns at tornadoes. I'm sorry. Honey, there's a tornado coming. Did you hear the siren? Yeah, I did. Well, grab my shotgun. Grab my AR-15. I'm headed out to shoot that damn tornado. Now, you and I know that guns are tools for self-defense, and we know that tornadoes threaten people's safety. Ipso facto, it's totally fine to shoot guns at tornadoes, right? Now, I am a lawyer, but I don't think that's all right. I challenge you to tell that to a judge, and they'll ask, I'm sorry, why are we here? And then the judge is going to bang their gavel and dismiss the case. Apparently, though, some Kansas popo who don't believe in our God-given freedoms as Americans would prefer that citizens not pop off rounds at tornadoes coming to kill their families and destroy their homes. Now, let's be real. Firing a gun at a tornado is an obviously terrible idea. But here's a quick rundown of what will happen if you decide to walk outside and start pumping rounds into a cyclone. One, and I keep thinking this is going to happen in a hurricane too. Every time you got to evacuate, stay indoors. The hurricane winds are horrible. And what do we always see? We inevitably see the reporter from some network standing on a beach somewhere, and I swear to goodness there's going to be a day when a 2x4 is going to come flying and either fly through the skull of that reporter or knock that dumbass reporter to the ground, and he's going to end up dead right there. So you and I are told, stay indoors, seek shelter, evacuate, but the reporters, being the gods they are immune from that. But let's think about what a tornado could do. It could hurl a brick or a tractor or a jagged piece of telephone pole right through your abdomen. You'll die. The tornado might actually pick up your gun and carry it away. The tornado, because it's now picked up your gun and whirling it around, depending on the gun, might start firing your gun at everything it passes. And now your county is under attack by both a tornado and an active shooter. See? Nothing good. It was once postulated by scientists that a tornado could potentially be dissipated by shooting some sort of explosive weaponry into it. Now, I know they were talking about cannons or rockets, missiles, bazookas, something, but I don't think they were talking about your 10 gauge. The idea was that an explosion would disrupt the funnel cloud and make it go away. But unfortunately, those nerds used math to figure out the coolest meteorological experiment would never really work. And they never tested it in the field. There's also the whole problem that the missile they fire might end up causing as much damage as the tornado anyway. But hey, at least they were thinking about something, right? Bubba, when the tornado warning comes, stay inside. Don't go running out to shoot at the tornado. And finally, you may recall that yesterday I talked about this new UN report that said that we are doomed to extinction, that more than 1 million species are about to become extinct, and that if we don't do something, Mother Nature is going to swallow us up, and it will be the end of civilization, and mankind will exist no more. So I asked Agent Jet A, because I just knew intuitively that 1 million species becoming extinct over the next 1 to 10 years, whatever the time period was, didn't sound like very many to me. And sure enough, I was right. Over the history of life on Earth, more than 5 billion, 99%, of all species that have ever existed have gone extinct. And our current census of different species is estimated at approximately 10 to 14 million. So let's just take the lower end. Currently, 10 million species exist on the Earth. Those scientists predicted that almost 1 million would become extinct. 10% or less. Now, we should keep in mind that the vast majority of species on the planet consist of insects and plants. The most conservative estimate of the number of insect species is 2 million, but some people put the figure as high as 30 million. But we should keep in mind that man is actively trying to kill off, without success, various species of dangerous insects, like the tsetse fly, tapeworms, noxious weeds that are detrimental to animal life. Would the world be worse off without biting gnats, tsetse flies, botflies, tapeworms, poison ivy? If those are part of the species of the 1 million that are about to die or become extinct, I say, hallelujah. It is utterly fascinating to me that we get these stories. If you stop, pause, and just take inventory of the doom and gloom stories, you might just want to crawl in a hole somewhere and die. Mother Nature's killing us. We're killing ourselves. The world's about to end. All of these species are dying off and we won't be able to live. Everywhere you look, doom and gloom. And I would say 90 or 99% of the time, the stories are simply factually incorrect. So when you hear the UN telling us that millions of species are about to die off, what about the 5 billion that have already gone extinct? See, we can't do math. 1 million versus 5 billion. Get your iPhone calculator out and calculate that percentage. Hey, thanks for listening to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. As usual, I would greatly appreciate, and in fact, now I'm going to beg, I'm going to grovel. I really want you to go to my website, michaelbrowntoday.com. And on the Spreaker, or I always post the podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr. I would sincerely appreciate it if you would share the podcast and help me get the podcast growing. It has grown very well. We've now done 14 or 15 episodes, so only a couple of weeks. And for me, the numbers have been tremendous, and I greatly appreciate that. But you know me, I'm never satisfied. And I want to grow the podcast even more. And I cannot do that without your help. So I'm asking you, when you go to michaelbrowntoday.com, to follow me on those social media links that you'll find across the bottom of the homepage. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. If you would follow me on all of those sites, I would greatly appreciate that. And then when you see me post on Twitter or Facebook, or if you go on Spreaker, if that's where you're listening to the podcast, or on Spotify or Stitcher or TuneIn, we're on all of those platforms. I would appreciate it if you would share or like the podcast so we can help get the word out. Because whether I go back to radio or not, I'm going to continue this podcast. I've gotten I don't want to think that I've gotten better at it, but I do want to believe that I've gotten more relaxed about doing it, because it's different being in my home studio than it is being in the radio studio. And so it's taken some adjustment, and I think over the past couple of weeks I've made those adjustments quicker than I expected, and a lot of that has to do with the helpful criticism that many of you have sent me. And I don't mind the criticism. I don't mind the suggestions. Feel free to do that. If you go to michaelbrowntoday.com, up there where it says book me, that's a contact page, and you can send me an email, and you can tell me what you think about the podcast, why you like it, why you dislike it. I really want the feedback, but you can also do that on Facebook. If you go to the Facebook page at facebook.com/Michael D. Brown, I have set up an internal discussion group. So if you want to join that, go over and like the Facebook page and then ask to join the discussion group. So again, thanks for listening to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. Go to michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com. Download the podcast, listen to the podcast, stream it. But the biggest favor I have to ask is help me grow this. Help me grow it by telling family and friends about, you like Michael Brown Unplugged, you like what I have to say, you like how I say it, and if you can get that word out, I would be forever grateful. Go to michaelbrowntoday.com, follow me, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.